Chapter 23. Hostages. Peter Blood stood in the pillared portico of Government House, and with unseeing eyes that were laden with pain and anger, stared out across the great harbor of Port Royal to the green hills rising from the farther shore and the ridge of the blue mountains beyond, showing hazily through the quivering heat. He was aroused by the return of the Negro who had gone to announce him, and following now this slave, he made his way through the house to the wide piazza behind it, in whose shade Colonel Bishop and my Lord Julian Wade took what little air there was. "So you've come," the deputy governor hailed him, and followed the greeting by a series of grunts of vague but apparently ill-humored import. He did not trouble to rise, not even when Lord Julian, obeying the instincts of finer breeding, set him the example. From under scowling brows, the wealthy Barbados planter considered his sometime slave, who, hat in hand, leaning lightly upon his long beribboned cane, revealed nothing in his countenance of the anger which was being steadily nourished by this cavalier reception. At last, with scowling brow and in self-sufficient tones, Colonel Bishop delivered himself. "I have sent for you, Captain Blood, because of certain news that has just reached me. I am informed that yesterday evening a frigate left the harbor, having on board your associate Wolverstone and 100 men of the 150 that were serving under you. His lordship and I shall be glad to have your explanation of how you came to permit that departure." "Permit?" quoth Blood. "I ordered it." The answer left Bishop speechless for a moment. Then, "You ordered it?" he said in accents of unbelief, whilst Lord Julian raised his eyebrows. "Swounds, perhaps you'll explain yourself. Whither has Wolverstone gone?" "To Tortuga." "He's gone with a message to the officers commanding the other 4 ships of the fleet that is awaiting me there, telling them what's happened and why they are no longer to expect me." Bishop's great face seemed to swell and its high color to deepen. He swung to Lord Julian. "You hear that, my lord? Deliberately he has let Wolverstone loose upon the seas again. Wolverstone, the worst of all that gang of pirates after himself. I hope your lordship begins at last to perceive the folly of granting the king's commission to such a man as this against all my counsels. Why, this thing it's just mutiny, treason. By God, it's matter for a court-martial. Will you cease your blather of mutiny and treason and courts-martial?" Blood put on his hat and sat down unbidden. "I have sent Wolverstone to inform Hagthorpe and Christian and Iberville and the rest of my lads that they've 1 clear month in which to follow my example, quit piracy, and get back to their boucans or their logwood, or else sail out of the Caribbean Sea. That's what I've done." "But the men?" his lordship interposed in his level, cultured voice. "This 100 men that Wolverstone has taken with him? They are those of my crew who have no taste for King James's service and have preferred to seek work of other kinds. It was in our compact, my lord, that there should be no constraining of my men." "I don't remember it," said his lordship with sincerity. Blood looked at him in surprise. Then he shrugged. "Faith, I'm not to blame for your lordship's poor memory. I say that it was so, and I don't lie. I've never found it necessary. In any case, ye couldn't have supposed that I should consent to anything different." And then the deputy governor exploded. "You have given those damned rascals in Tortuga this warning so that they may escape. That is what you have done. That is how you abuse the commission that has saved your own neck." Peter Blood considered him steadily, his face impassive. "I will remind you," he said at last, very quietly, "that the object in view was, leaving out of account your own appetites which, as everyone knows, are just those of a hangman, to rid the Caribbean of buccaneers. Now, I've taken the most effective way of accomplishing that object. The knowledge that I've entered the king's service should in itself go far towards disbanding the fleet of which I was, until lately, the admiral." "I see," sneered the deputy governor malevolently, "and if it does not?" It will be time enough then to consider what else is to be done. Lord Julian forestalled a fresh outburst on the part of Bishop. It is possible, he said, that my Lord Sunderland will be satisfied, provided that the solution is such as you promise. It was a courteous, conciliatory speech. Urged by friendliness towards Blood and understanding of the difficult position in which the buccaneer found himself, his lordship was disposed to take his stand upon the letter of his instructions. Therefore he now held out a friendly hand to help him over the latest and most difficult obstacle which Blood himself had enabled Bishop to place in the way of his redemption. Unfortunately, the last person from whom Peter Blood desired assistance at that moment was this young nobleman, whom he regarded with the jaundiced eyes of jealousy. "Anyway," he answered with a suggestion of defiance and more than a suggestion of a sneer, "it's the most ye should expect from me, and certainly it's the most ye'll get." His lordship frowned and dabbed his lips with a handkerchief. "I don't think that I quite like the way you put it. Indeed, upon reflection, Captain Blood, I am sure that I do not." "I am sorry for that, so I am," said Blood impudently, "but there it is. I'm not on that account concerned to modify it." His lordship's pale eyes opened a little wider. Languidly he raised his eyebrows. "Ah," he said, "you're a prodigiously uncivil fellow. You disappoint me, sir. I had formed the notion that you might be a gentleman." "And that's not your lordship's only mistake," Bishop cut in. "You made a worse when you gave him the king's commission, and so sheltered the rascal from the gallows I had prepared for him in Port Royal." "Aye, but the worst mistake of all in this matter of commissions," said Blood to his lordship, "was the one that trade this greasy slaver, deputy governor of Jamaica, instead of its hangman, which is the office for which he's by nature fitted." "Captain Blood," said his lordship sharply in reproof, "upon my soul and honor, sir, you go much too far. You are—" But here Bishop interrupted him. He had heaved himself to his feet at last, and was venting his fury in unprintable abuse. Captain Blood, who had also risen, stood apparently impassive, for the storm to spend itself. When at last this happened, he addressed himself quietly to Lord Julian, as if Colonel Bishop had not spoken. "Your lordship was about to say?" he asked, with challenging smoothness. But his lordship had by now recovered his habitual composure, and was again disposed to be conciliatory. He laughed and shrugged. "Faith, here's a deal of unnecessary heat," said he, "and God knows this plaguey climate provides enough of that. Perhaps, Colonel Bishop, you are a little uncompromising, and you, sir, are certainly a deal too peppery. I have said, speaking on behalf of my Lord Sunderland, that I am content to await the result of your experiment." But Bishop's fury had by now reached a stage in which it was not to be restrained. "Are you, indeed?" he roared. "Well then, I am not. This is a matter in which your lordship must allow me to be the better judge, and anyhow I'll take the risk of acting on my own responsibility." Lord Julian abandoned the struggle. He smiled wearily, shrugged, and waved a hand in implied resignation. The deputy governor stormed on. "Since my lord here has given you a commission, I can't regularly deal with you out of hand for piracy as you deserve. But you shall answer before a court-martial for your action in the matter of Wolverstone, and take the consequences." "I see," said Blood. "Now we come to it, and it's yourself as deputy governor will preside over that same court-martial, so that ye can wipe off old scores by hanging me. It's little ye care how ye do it." He laughed and added, "Praemonitus, praemonitus." "What shall that mean?" quoth Lord Julian sharply. "I had imagined that your lordship would have had some education." He was at pains, you see, to be provocative. "It's not the literal meaning I am asking, sir," said Lord Julian with frosty dignity. "I want to know what you desire me to understand." "I'll leave your lordship guessing," said Blood, "and I'll be wishing ye both a very good day." He swept off his feathered hat and made them a leg very elegantly. "Before you go," said Bishop, "and to save you from any idle rashness, I'll tell you that the harbor master and the commandant have their orders. You don't leave Port Royal, my fine gallows bird. Damn, I mean to provide you with permanent moorings here in Execution Dock." Peter Blood stiffened, and his vivid blue eyes stabbed the bloated face of his enemy. He passed his long cane into his left hand, and with his right thrust negligently into the breast of his doublet, he swung to Lord Julian, who was thoughtfully frowning. "Your lordship, I think, promised me immunity from this." "What I may have promised," said his lordship, "your own conduct makes it difficult to perform." He rose. "You did me a service, Captain Blood, and I had hoped that we might be friends, but since you prefer to have it otherwise—" He shrugged and waved a hand towards the deputy governor. Blood completed the sentence in his own way. "Ye mean that ye haven't the strength of character to resist the urgings of a bully." He was apparently at his ease, and actually smiling. "Well, well, as I said before, premonitus, premunitus. I'm afraid that you're no scholar, Bishop, or ye'd know that I means forewarned, forearmed." "Forewarned? Ha!" Bishop almost snarled. "The warning comes a little late. You do not leave this house." He took a step in the direction of the doorway and raised his voice. "Ho there," he was beginning to call. Then, with a sudden audible catch in his breath, he stopped short. Captain Blood's right hand had re-emerged from the breast of his doublet, bringing with it a long pistol with silver mountings richly chased, which he leveled within a foot of the deputy governor's head. "And forearmed," said he. "Don't stir from where you are, my lord, or there may be an accident." And my lord, who had been moving to Bishop's assistance, stood instantly arrested. Chap fallen, with much of his high color suddenly departed, the deputy governor was swaying on unsteady legs. Peter Blood considered him with a grimness that increased his panic. "I marvel that I don't pistol you without more ado, ye fat blackguard. If I don't, it's for the same reason that once before I gave ye your life when it was forfeit. You're not aware of the reason, to be sure, but it may comfort ye to know that it exists. At the same time, I'll warn ye not to put too heavy a strain on my generosity, which resides at the moment in my trigger finger. Ye mean to hang me, and since that's the worst that can happen to me anyway, you'll realize that I'll not boggle at increasing the account by spilling your nasty blood." He cast his cane from him, thus disengaging his left hand. "Be good enough to give me your arm, Colonel Bishop. Come, come, man, your arm." Under the compulsion of that sharp tone, those resolute eyes, and that gleaming pistol, Bishop obeyed without demur. His recent foul volubility was stemmed. He could not trust himself to speak. Captain Blood tucked his left arm through the deputy governor's proffered right. Then he thrust his own right hand with its pistol back into the breast of his doublet. "Though invisible, it's aiming at ye none the less, and I give you my word of honor that I'll shoot ye dead upon the very least provocation, whether that provocation is yours or another's. You'll bear that in mind, Lord Julian. And now, ye greasy hangman, step out as brisk and lively as ye can, and behave as naturally as ye may, or it's the black stream of cositus you'll be contemplating." Arm in arm they passed through the house and down the garden, where Arabella lingered, awaiting Peter Blood's return. Consideration of his parting words had brought her first turmoil of mind, then a clear perception of what might be indeed the truth of the death of Levasseur. She perceived that the particular inference drawn from it might similarly have been drawn from Blood's deliverance of Mary Trail. When a man so risks his life for a woman, the rest is easily assumed. For the men who will take such risks without hope of personal gain are few. Blood was of those few, as he had proved in the case of Mary Trail. It needed no further assurances of his to convince her that she had done him a monstrous injustice. She remembered words he had used, words overheard aboard his ship, which he had named the Arabella on the night of her deliverance from the Spanish admiral, words he had uttered when she had approved his acceptance of the king's commission. The words he had spoken to her that very morning, which had but served to move her indignation, all these assumed a fresh meaning in her mind, delivered now from its unwarranted preconceptions. Therefore she lingered there in the garden, awaiting his return, that she might make amends, that she might set a term to all misunderstanding. In impatience she awaited him, yet her patience, it seemed, was to be tested further. For when at last he came, it was in company, unusually close and intimate company, with her uncle. In vexation, she realized that explanations must be postponed. Could she have guessed the extent of that postponement, vexation would have been changed into despair. He passed, with his companion, from that fragrant garden into the courtyard of the fort. Here, the commandant, who had been instructed to hold himself in readiness with the necessary men against the need to effect the arrest of Captain Blood, was amazed by the curious spectacle of the deputy governor of Jamaica strolling forth arm in arm and apparently on the friendliest terms with the intended prisoner, for as they went, Blood was chatting and laughing briskly. They passed out of the gates unchallenged and so came to the mole where the cockboat from the Arabella was waiting. They took their places side by side in the stern sheets and were pulled away together, always very close and friendly, to the great red ship where Jeremy Pitt so anxiously awaited news. You conceive the master's amazement to see the deputy governor come toiling up the entrance ladder, with Blood following very close behind him. "Sure, I walked into a trap, as ye feared, Jeremy," Blood hailed him, "but I walked out again and fetched the trapper with me. He loves his life, does this fat rascal." Colonel Bishop stood in the waist, his great face blenched to the color of clay, his mouth loose, almost afraid to look at the sturdy ruffians who lounged about the shot-rack on the main hatch. Blood shouted an order to the boatswain, who was leaning against the forecastle bulkhead. "Throw me a rope with a running noose over the yardarm there, against the need of it. Now, don't be alarming yourself, Colonel darling. It's no more than a provision against your being unreasonable, which I am sure you'll not be. We'll talk the matter over whiles we are dining, for I trust you'll not refuse to honor my table by your company." He led away the will-less, cowed bully to the great cabin. Benjamin, the negro steward, in white drawers and cotton shirt, made haste by his command to serve dinner. Colonel Bishop collapsed on the locker under the stern ports and spoke now for the first time. "May I ask, what are your intentions?" he quavered. "Why, nothing sinister, Colonel. Although ye deserve nothing less than that same rope and yardarm, I assure you that it's to be employed only as a last resource. Ye've said his lordship made a mistake when he handed me the commission, which the Secretary of State did me the honor to design for me. I'm disposed to agree with you, so I'll take to the sea again. Cross ingens iterabimus iquor. It's the fine Latin scholar ye'll be when I've done with ye. I'll be getting back to Tortuga and my buccaneers, who at least are honest, decent fellows. So I've fetched ye aboard as a hostage." "My God," groaned the deputy governor, "yea, ye never mean that you'll carry me to Tortuga." Blood laughed outright. "Oh, I'd never serve ye such a bad turn as that. No, no. All I want is that ye ensure my safe departure from Port Royal. And, if you're reasonable, I'll not even trouble you to swim for it this time. Ye've given certain orders to your harbor master, and others to the commandant of your plaguey fort. You'll be so good as to send for them both aboard here, and inform them in my presence that the Arabella is leaving this afternoon on the King's service, and is to pass out unmolested, and so as to make quite sure of their obedience, they shall go a little voyage with us, themselves. Here's what you require. Now write, unless you prefer the yardarm." Colonel Bishop heaved himself up in a pet. "You constrain me with violence," he was beginning. Blood smoothly interrupted him. "Sure now, I am not constraining you at all. I'm giving you a perfectly free choice between the pen and the rope. It's a matter for yourself entirely." Bishop glared at him. Then, shrugging heavily, he took up the pen and sat down at the table. In an unsteady hand he wrote that summons to his officers. Blood dispatched it ashore, and then bade his unwilling guest to table. "I trust, Colonel, your appetite is as stout as usual." The wretched bishop took the seat to which he was commanded. As for eating, however, that was not easy to a man in his position, nor did Blood press him. The captain himself fell to with a good appetite, but before he was midway through the meal came Hayton to inform him that Lord Julian Wade had just come aboard and was asking to see him instantly. "I was expecting him," said Blood. "Fetch him in." Lord Julian came. He was very stern and dignified. His eyes took in the situation at a glance as Captain Blood rose to greet him. "It's mighty friendly of you to have joined us, my lord." "Captain Blood," said his lordship with asperity, "I find your humor a little forced. I don't know what may be your intentions, but I wonder, do you realize the risks you are running? And I wonder, does your lordship realize the risk to yourself in following us aboard as I had counted that you would?" "What shall that mean, sir?" Blood signaled to Benjamin, who was standing behind Bishop. "Set a chair for his lordship. Hayton, send his lordship's boat ashore. Tell them he'll not be returning yet awhile." "What's that?" cried his lordship. "Blister me! D'ye mean to detain me? Are ye mad?" "Better wait, Hayton, in case his lordship should turn violent," said Blood. "You, Benjamin, you heard the message. Deliver it." "Will you tell me what you intend, sir?" demanded his lordship, quivering with anger. "Just to make myself and my lads here safe from Colonel Bishop's gallows. I've said that I trusted to your gallantry not to leave him in the lurch, but to follow him hither, and there's a note from his hand gone ashore to summon the harbor master and the commandant of the fort. Once they are aboard, I shall have all the hostages I need for our safety." "You scoundrel," said his lordship through his teeth. "Sure, now, that's entirely a matter of the point of view," said Blood. "Ordinarily, it isn't the kind of name I could suffer any man to apply to me. Still, considering that ye willingly did me a service once, and that you're likely unwillingly to do me another now, I'll overlook your discourtesy, so I will." His lordship laughed. "You fool," he said, "do you dream that I came aboard your pirate ship without taking my measures? I informed the commandant of exactly how you had compelled Colonel Bishop to accompany you. Judge now whether he or the harbor master will obey the summons, or whether you will be allowed to depart as you imagine." Blood's face became grave. "I'm sorry for that," said he. "I thought you would be," answered his lordship. "Oh, but not on my own account. It's the deputy governor there I'm sorry for. D'ye know what you've done? Sure, now, you've very likely hanged him." "My God!" cried Bishop in a sudden increase of panic. "If they so much as put a shot across my bows, up goes their deputy governor to the yardarm. Your only hope, Colonel, lies in the fact that I shall send them word of that intention, and so that you may mend as far as you can the harm you have done, it's yourself shall bear them the message, my lord." "I'll see you damned before I do," fumed his lordship. "Why, that's unreasonable and unreasoning. But if ye insist, why, another messenger will do as well, and another hostage aboard, as I had originally intended, will make my hand the stronger." Lord Julian stared at him, realizing exactly what he had refused. "You'll think better of it now that ye understand?" quoth Blood. "Aye, in God's name, go, my lord," spluttered Bishop, "and make yourself obeyed. This damned pirate has me by the throat." His lordship surveyed him with an eye that was not by any means admiring. "Why, if that is your wish," he began. Then he shrugged and turned again to Blood. "I suppose I can trust you that no harm will come to Colonel Bishop if you are allowed to sail?" "You have my word for it," said Blood, "and also that I shall put him safely ashore again without delay." Lord Julian bowed stiffly to the cowering deputy governor. "You understand, sir, that I do as you desire," he said coldly. "Aye, man, aye," Bishop assented hastily. "Very well." Lord Julian bowed again and took his departure. Blood escorted him to the entrance ladder, at the foot of which still swung the Arabella's own cockboat. "It's goodbye, my lord," said Blood. "And there's another thing." He proffered a parchment that he had drawn from his pocket. "It's the commission. Bishop was right when he said it was a mistake." Lord Julian considered him, and considering him, his expression softened. "I am sorry," he said sincerely. "In other circumstances," began Blood. "Oh, but there, you'll understand, the boat's waiting." Yet with his foot on the first rung of the ladder, Lord Julian hesitated. "I still do not perceive, blister me if I do, why you should not have found someone else to carry your message to the Commandant and kept me aboard as an added hostage for his obedience to your wishes." Blood's vivid eyes looked into the others that were clear and honest, and he smiled a little wistfully. A moment he seemed to hesitate. Then he explained himself quite fully. "Why shouldn't I tell you? It's the same reason that's been urging me to pick a quarrel with you so that I might have the satisfaction of slipping a couple of feet of steel into your vitals. When I accepted your commission, I was moved to think it might redeem me in the eyes of Miss Bishop, for whose sake, as you may have guessed, I took it, but I have discovered that such a thing is beyond accomplishment. I should have known it for a sick man's dream. I have discovered also that if she's choosing you, as I believe she is, she's choosing wisely between us, and that's why I'll not have your life risked by keeping you aboard whilst the message goes by another who might bungle it. Now, perhaps you'll understand." Lord Julian stared at him bewildered. His long, aristocratic face was very pale. "My God," he said. "And you tell me this?" "I tell you because— oh, plague on it, so that ye may tell her, so that she may be made to realize that there's something of the unfortunate gentleman left under the thief and pirate she accounts me, and that her own good is my supreme desire. Knowing that, she may remember me more kindly, if it's only in her prayers. That's all, my lord." Lord Julian continued to look at the buccaneer in silence. In silence, at last, he held out his hand, and in silence Blood took it. "I wonder whether you are right," said his lordship, "and whether you are not the better man. Where she is concerned, see that you make sure that I am right. Goodbye to you." Lord Julian wrung his hand in silence, went down the ladder, and was pulled ashore. From the distance he waved to Blood, who stood leaning on the bulwarks watching the receding cockboat. The Arabella sailed within the hour, moving lazily before a sluggish breeze. The fort remained silent, and there was no movement from the fleet to hinder her departure. Lord Julian had carried the message effectively and had added to it his own personal commands. Chapter 24. War. 5 miles out at sea from Port Royal, whence the details of the coast of Jamaica were losing their sharpness, the Arabella hove to, and the sloop she had been towing was warped alongside. Captain Blood escorted his compulsory guest to the head of the ladder. Colonel Bishop, who for 2 hours and more had been in a state of mortal anxiety, breathed freely at last, and as the tide of his fears receded, so that of his deep-rooted hate of this audacious buccaneer resumed its normal flow, but he practiced circumspection. If in his heart he vowed that once back in Port Royal there was no effort he would spare, no nerve he would not strain to bring Peter Blood to final moorings in Execution Dock, at least he kept that vow strictly to himself. Peter Blood had no illusions. He was not, and never would be, the complete pirate. There was not another buccaneer in all the Caribbean who would have denied himself the pleasure of stringing Colonel Bishop from the yardarm, and by thus finally stifling the vindictive planter's hatred, have increased his own security. But Blood was not of these. Moreover, in the case of Colonel Bishop, there was a particular reason for restraint. Because he was Arabella Bishop's uncle, his life must remain sacred to Captain Blood. And so the captain smiled into the sallow, bloated face and the little eyes that fixed him with a malevolence not to be dissembled. "A safe voyage home to you, Colonel darling," said he in valediction, and from his easy, smiling manner you would never have dreamt of the pain he carried in his breast. "It's the second time you've served me for a hostage. You'll be well advised to avoid a third. I'm not lucky to you, Colonel, as you should be perceiving." Jeremy Pitt, the master, lounging at Blood's elbow, looked darkly upon the departure of the deputy governor. Behind them a little mob of grim, stalwart, sun-tanned buccaneers were restrained from cracking Bishop like a flea only by their submission to the dominant will of their leader. They had learnt from Pitt while yet in Port Royal of their captain's danger, and whilst as ready as he to throw over the king's service which had been thrust upon them, yet they resented the manner in which this had been rendered necessary, and they marveled now at Blood's restraint where Bishop was concerned. The deputy governor looked round and met the lowering, hostile glances of those fierce eyes. Instinct warned him that his life at that moment was held precariously, that an injudicious word might precipitate an explosion of hatred from which no human power could save him. Therefore he said nothing. He inclined his head in silence to the captain and went blundering and stumbling in his haste down that ladder to the sloop and its waiting negro crew. They pushed off the craft from the red hull of the Arabella, bent to their sweeps, then, hoisting sail, headed back for Port Royal, intent upon reaching it before darkness should come down upon them. And Bishop, the great bulk of him huddled in the stern sheets, sat silent, his black brows knitted, his coarse lips pursed, malevolence and vindictiveness so whelming now his recent panic that he forgot his near escape of the yardarm and the running noose. On the mole at Port Royal, under the low, embattled wall of the fort, Major Mallard and Lord Julian waited to receive him, and it was with infinite relief that they assisted him from the sloop. Major Mallard was disposed to be apologetic. "Glad to see you safe, sir," said he. "I'd have sunk Blood's ship in spite of your excellencies being aboard, but for your own orders by Lord Julian, and his lordship's assurance that he had Blood's word for it, that no harm should come to you, so that no harm came to him. I'll confess I thought it rash of his lordship to accept the word of a damned pirate. I have found it as good as another's," said his lordship, cropping the major's too eager eloquence. He spoke with an unusual degree of that frosty dignity he could assume upon occasion. The fact is that his lordship was in an exceedingly bad humor. Having written jubilantly home to the Secretary of State that his mission had succeeded, he was now faced with the necessity of writing again to confess that this success had been ephemeral. And because Major Mallard's crisp mustachios were lifted by a sneer at the notion of a buccaneer's word being acceptable, he added still more sharply, "My justification is here in the person of Colonel Bishop safely returned. As against that, sir, your opinion does not weigh for very much. You should realize it." "Oh, as your lordship says." Major Mallard's manner was tinged with irony. "To be sure, here is the colonel safe and sound, and out yonder is Captain Blood, also safe and sound, to begin his piratical ravages all over again. I do not propose to discuss the reasons with you, Major Mallard." "And anyway, it's not for long," growled the colonel, finding speech at last. "No, bye." He emphasized the assurance by an unprintable oath. "If I spend the last shilling of my fortune and the last ship of the Jamaica fleet, I'll have that rascal in a hempen necktie before I rest, and I'll not be long about it." He had empurpled in his angry vehemence, and the veins of his forehead stood out like whipcord. Then he checked. "You did well to follow Lord Julian's instructions," he commended the major. With that he turned from him and took his lordship by the arm. "Come, my lord, we must take order about this, you and I." They went off together, skirting the redoubt, and so through courtyard and garden to the house where Arabella waited anxiously. The sight of her uncle brought her infinite relief, not only on his own account, but on account also of Captain Blood. "You took a great risk, sir," she gravely told Lord Julian after the ordinary greetings had been exchanged. But Lord Julian answered her as he had answered Major Mallard. "There was no risk, ma'am." She looked at him in some astonishment. His long, aristocratic face wore a more melancholy, pensive air than usual. He answered the enquiry in her glance. So that Blood's ship were allowed to pass the fort, no harm could come to Colonel Bishop. Blood pledged me his word for that. A faint smile broke the set of her lips, which hitherto had been wistful, and a little color tinged her cheeks. She would have pursued the subject, but the deputy governor's mood did not permit it. He sneered and snorted at the notion of Blood's word being good for anything, forgetting that he owed to it his own preservation at that moment. At supper, and for long thereafter, he talked of nothing but Blood, of how he would lay him by the heels, and what hideous things he would perform upon his body. And as he drank heavily the while, his speech became increasingly gross, and his threats increasingly horrible, until in the end Arabella withdrew, white-faced and almost on the verge of tears. It was not often that Bishop revealed himself to his niece. Oddly enough, this coarse, overbearing planter went in a certain awe of that slim girl. It was as if she had inherited from her father the respect in which he had always been held by his brother. Lord Julian, who began to find Bishop disgusting beyond endurance, excused himself soon after and went in quest of the lady. He had yet to deliver the message from Captain Blood, and this, he thought, would be his opportunity. But Miss Bishop had retired for the night, and Lord Julian must curb his impatience. It amounted by now to nothing less until the morrow. Very early next morning, before the heat of the day came to render the open intolerable to his lordship, he espied her from his window moving amid the azaleas in the garden. It was a fitting setting for one who was still as much a delightful novelty to him in womanhood as was the azalea among flowers. He hurried forth to join her, and when, aroused from her pensiveness, she had given him a good morrow, smiling and frank, he explained himself by the announcement that he bore her a message from Captain Blood. He observed her little start and the slight quiver of her lips, and observed thereafter not only her pallor and the shadowy rings about her eyes, but also that unusually wistful air which last night had escaped his notice. They moved out of the open to one of the terraces, where a pergola of orange trees provided a shaded sauntering space that was at once cool and fragrant. As they went, he considered her admiringly, and marveled at himself that it should have taken him so long fully to realize her slim, unusual grace, and to find her, as he now did, so entirely desirable, a woman whose charm must irradiate all the life of a man and touch its commonplaces into magic. He noted the sheen of her red-brown hair and how gracefully one of its heavy ringlets coiled upon her slender, milk-white neck. She wore a gown of shimmering gray silk, and a scarlet rose, fresh gathered, was pinned at her breast like a splash of blood. Always thereafter, when he thought of her, it was as he saw her at that moment, as never, I think, until that moment had he seen her. In silence they paced on a little way into the green shade. Then she paused and faced him. "You said something of a message, sir," she reminded him, thus betraying some of her impatience. He fingered the ringlets of his periwig, a little embarrassed how to deliver himself, considering how he should begin. "He desired me," he said at last, "to give you a message that should prove to you that there is still something left in him of the unfortunate gentleman that for which once you knew him." "That is not now necessary," said she very gravely. He misunderstood her, of course, knowing nothing of the enlightenment that yesterday had come to her. "I think, nay, I know that you do him an injustice," said he. Her hazel eyes continued to regard him. "If you will deliver the message, it may enable me to judge." To him, this was confusing. He did not immediately answer. He found that he had not sufficiently considered the terms he should employ, and the matter, after all, was of an exceeding delicacy, demanding delicate handling. It was not so much that he was concerned to deliver a message as to render it a vehicle by which to plead his own cause. Lord Julian, well versed in the lore of womankind, and usually at his ease with ladies of the beau monde, found himself oddly constrained before this frank and unsophisticated niece of a colonial planter. They moved on in silence, and as if by common consent towards the brilliant sunshine where the pergola was intersected by the avenue leading upwards to the house. Across this patch of light fluttered a gorgeous butterfly that was like black and scarlet velvet and large as a man's hand. His lordship's brooding eyes followed it out of sight before he answered. "It is not easy. Stab me, it is not. He was a man who deserved well, and amongst us we have marred his chances, your uncle, because he could not forget his rancor, you, because having told him that in the king's service he would find his redemption of what was past, you would not afterwards admit to him that he was so redeemed. And this, although concerned to rescue you, was the chief motive of his embracing that same service." She had turned her shoulder to him so that he should not see her face. I know now," she said softly. Then, after a pause, she added the question, "And you? What part has your lordship had in this, that you should incriminate yourself with us?" "My part?" Again he hesitated, then plunged recklessly on, as men do when determined to perform a thing they fear. If I understood him aright, if he understood aright, himself, my part, though entirely passive, was none the less effective. I implore you to observe that I but report his own words. I say nothing for myself. His lordship's unusual nervousness was steadily increasing. He thought, then, so he told me, that my presence here had contributed to his inability to redeem himself in your sight, and unless he were so redeemed, then was redemption nothing. She faced him fully, a frown of perplexity bringing her brows together above her troubled eyes. "He thought that you had contributed?" she echoed. It was clear she asked for enlightenment. He plunged on to afford it her, his glance a little scared, his cheeks flushing. "Aye, and he said so in terms which told me something that I hope above all things, and yet dare not believe, for, God knows, I am no coxcomb, Arabella. He said, 'But first let me tell you how I was placed. I had gone aboard his ship to demand the instant surrender of your uncle whom he held captive. He laughed at me. Colonel Bishop should be a hostage for his safety. By rashly venturing aboard his ship, I afforded him in my own person yet another hostage, as valuable, at least, as Colonel Bishop. Yet he bade me depart, not from the fear of consequences, for he is above fear, nor from any personal esteem for me whom he confessed that he had come to find detestable, and this for the very reason that made him concerned for my safety. I do not understand," she said as he paused. "Is not that a contradiction in itself?" "It seems so only. The fact is, Arabella, this unfortunate man has the temerity to love you." She cried out at that and clutched her breast, whose calm was suddenly disturbed. Her eyes dilated as she stared at him. "I've startled you," said he with concern. "I feared I should, but it was necessary so that you may understand." "Go on," she bade him. "Well, then, he saw in me one who made it impossible that he should win you. So he said, therefore he could with satisfaction have killed me. But because my death might cause you pain, because your happiness was the thing that above all things he desired, he surrendered that part of his guarantee of safety which my person afforded him. If his departure should be hindered, and I should lose my life in what might follow, there was the risk that you might mourn me. That risk he would not take. Him you deemed a thief and a pirate, he said, and added that, I am giving you his own words always. If, in choosing between us two, your choice, as he believed, would fall on me, then were you, in his opinion, choosing wisely. Because of that, he bade me leave his ship and had me put ashore." She looked at him with eyes that were swim with tears. He took a step towards her, a catch in his breath, his hand held out. "Was he right, Arabella? My life's happiness hangs upon your answer." But she continued silently to regard him with those tear-laden eyes, without speaking, and until she spoke, he dared not advance farther. A doubt, a tormenting doubt, beset him. When presently she spoke, he saw how true had been the instinct of which that doubt was born. For her words revealed the fact that of all that he had said, the only thing that had touched her consciousness and absorbed it from all other considerations was Blood's conduct as it regarded herself. "He said that," she cried. "He did that. Oh!" She turned away, and through the slender, clustering trunks of the bordering orange trees she looked out across the glittering waters of the great harbor to the distant hills. Thus, for a little while, my lord standing stiffly, fearfully, waiting for fuller revelation of her mind. At last it came, slowly, deliberately, in a voice that at moments was half suffocated. Last night, when my uncle displayed his rancor and his evil rage, it began to be borne in upon me that such vindictiveness can belong only to those who have wronged. It is the frenzy into which men whip themselves to justify an evil passion. I must have known then, if I had not already learnt it, that I had been too credulous of all the unspeakable things attributed to Peter Blood. Yesterday I had his own explanation of that tale of Levasseur that you heard in St. Nicholas, and now this but gives me confirmation of his truth and worth. To a scoundrel such as I was too readily brought to believe him, the act of which you have just told me would have been impossible. "That is my own opinion," said his lordship gently. "It must be. But even if it were not, that would now weigh for nothing. What weighs, oh, so heavily and bitterly, is the thought that, but for the words in which yesterday I repelled him, he might have been saved. If only I could have spoken to him again before he went. I waited for him, but my uncle was with him, and I had no suspicion that he was going away again. And now he is lost, back at his outlawry and piracy, in which ultimately he will be taken and destroyed, and the fault is mine. Mine. What are you saying? The only agents were your uncle's hostility and his own obstinacy, which would not study compromise. You must not blame yourself for anything." She swung to him with some impatience, her eyes aswim in tears. "You can say that, and in spite of his message, which in itself tells how much I was to blame. It was my treatment of him, the epithets I cast at him, that drove him. So much he has told you. I know it to be true." "You have no cause for shame," said he. "As for your sorrow, why, if it will afford you solace, you may still count on me to do what man can to rescue him from this position." She caught her breath. "You will do that," she cried with sudden eager hopefulness. "You promise?" She held out her hand to him impulsively. He took it in both his own. "I promise," he answered her, and then, retaining still the hand she had surrendered to him, "Arabella," he said very gently, "there is still this other matter upon which you have not answered me." This other matter? Was he mad, she wondered? Could any other matter signify in such a moment? This matter that concerns myself and all my future, oh, so very closely. This thing that Blood believed, that prompted him, that you are not indifferent to me. He saw the fair face change color and grow troubled once more. "Indifferent to you?" said she. "Why, no. We have been good friends. We shall continue so, I hope, my lord." Friends? Good friends? He was between dismay and bitterness. "It is not your friendship only that I ask, Arabella. You heard what I said, what I reported. You will not say that Peter Blood was wrong." Gently she sought to disengage her hand, the trouble in her face increasing. A moment he resisted. Then, realizing what he did, he set her free. "Arabella," he cried on a note of sudden pain. "I have friendship for you, my lord, but only friendship." His castle of hopes came clattering down about him, leaving him a little stunned. As he had said, he was no coxcomb, yet there was something that he did not understand. She confessed to friendship, and it was in his power to offer her a great position, one to which she, a colonial planter's niece, however wealthy, could never have aspired even in her dreams. This she rejected, yet spoke of friendship. Peter Blood had been mistaken, then. How far had he been mistaken? Had he been as mistaken in her feelings towards himself as he obviously was in her feelings towards his lordship? In that case, his reflections broke short. To speculate was to wound himself in vain. He must know. Therefore, he asked her with grim frankness, "Is it Peter Blood?" "Peter Blood?" she echoed. At first she did not understand the purport of his question. When understanding came, a flush suffused her face. "I do not know," she said, faltering a little. This was hardly a truthful answer. For, as if an obscuring veil had suddenly been rent that morning, she was permitted at last to see Peter Blood in his true relations to other men, and that sight, vouchsafed her 24 hours too late, filled her with pity and regret and yearning. Lord Julian knew enough of women to be left in no further doubt. He bowed his head so that she might not see the anger in his eyes, for as a man of honor he took shame in that anger which as a human being he could not repress. And because nature in him was stronger, as it is in most of us, than training, Lord Julian from that moment began, almost in spite of himself, to practice something that was akin to villainy. I regret to chronicle it of one for whom, if I have done him any sort of justice, you should have been conceiving some esteem. But the truth is that the lingering remains of the regard in which he had held Peter Blood were choked by the desire to supplant and destroy a rival. He had passed his word to Arabella that he would use his powerful influence on Blood's behalf. I deplore to set it down that not only did he forget his pledge, but secretly set himself to aid and abet Arabella's uncle in the plans he laid for the trapping and undoing of the buccaneer. He might reasonably have urged, had he been taxed with it, that he conducted himself precisely as his duty demanded, but to that he might have been answered, that duty with him was but the slave of jealousy in this. When the Jamaica fleet put to sea some few days later, Lord Julian sailed with Colonel Bishop in Vice Admiral Crowford's flagship. Not only was there no need for either of them to go, but the deputy governor's duties actually demanded that he should remain ashore, whilst Lord Julian, as we know, was a useless man aboard a ship. Yet both set out to hunt Captain Blood, each making of his duty a pretext for the satisfaction of personal aims, and that common purpose became a link between them, binding them in a sort of friendship that must otherwise have been impossible between men so dissimilar in breeding and in aspirations. The hunt was up. They cruised a while off Hispaniola, watching the windward passage and suffering the discomforts of the rainy season which had now set in. But they cruised in vain, and after a month of it returned empty-handed to Port Royal, there to find awaiting them the most disquieting news from the Old World. The megalomania of Louis XIV had set Europe in a blaze of war. The French legionaries were ravaging the Rhine provinces, and Spain had joined the nations leagued to defend themselves from the wild ambitions of the King of France. And there was worse than this. There were rumors of civil war in England, where the people had grown weary of the bigoted tyranny of King James. It was reported that William of Orange had been invited to come over. Weeks passed, and every ship from home brought additional news. William had crossed to England, and in March of that year, 1689, they learnt in Jamaica that he had accepted the crown and that James had thrown himself into the arms of France for rehabilitation. To a kinsman of Sunderland's, this was disquieting news indeed. It was followed by letters from King William's Secretary of State informing Colonel Bishop that there was war with France, and that, in view of its effect upon the colonies, a Governor-General was coming out to the West Indies in the person of Lord Willoughby, and that with him came a squadron under the command of Admiral van der Kuylen to reinforce the Jamaica fleet against eventualities. Bishop realized that this must mean the end of his supreme authority, even though he should continue in Port Royal as deputy governor. Lord Julian, in the lack of direct news to himself, did not know what it might mean to him, but he had been very close and confidential with Colonel Bishop regarding his hopes of Arabella, and Colonel Bishop, more than ever, now that political events put him in danger of being retired, was anxious to enjoy the advantages of having a man of Lord Julian's eminence for his relative. They came to a complete understanding in the matter, and Lord Julian disclosed all that he knew. "There is one obstacle in our path," said he. "Captain Blood. The girl is in love with him." "You're surely mad," cried Bishop when he had recovered speech. "You are justified of the assumption," said his lordship dolefully, "but I happen to be sane and to speak with knowledge." "With knowledge?" "Arabella herself has confessed it to me." "The brazen baggage! By God, I'll bring her to her senses." It was the slave driver speaking, the man who governed with a whip. "Don't be a fool, Bishop." His lordship's contempt did more than any argument to calm the colonel. "That's not the way with a girl of Arabella's spirit. Unless you want to wreck my chances for all time, you'll hold your tongue and not interfere at all." "Not interfere? My God, what then? Listen, man, she has a constant mind. I don't think you know your niece. As long as Blood lives, she will wait for him. Then, with Blood dead, perhaps she will come to her silly senses." "Now you begin to show intelligence," Lord Julian commended him. "That is the first essential step, and here is our chance to take it." Bishop warmed to a sort of enthusiasm. "This war with France removes all restrictions in the matter of Tortuga. We are free to invest it in the service of the Crown. A victory there, and we establish ourselves in the favor of this new government." "Ah," said Lord Julian, and he pulled thoughtfully at his lip. "I see that you understand." Bishop laughed coarsely. "Two birds with one stone, eh? We'll hunt this rascal in his lair, right under the beard of the King of France, and we'll take him this time, if we reduce Tortuga to a heap of ashes." On that expedition they sailed 2 days later, which would be some 3 months after Blood's departure, taking every ship of the fleet and several lesser vessels as auxiliaries. To Arabella and the world in general, it was given out that they were going to raid French Hispaniola, which was really the only expedition that could have afforded Colonel Bishop any sort of justification for leaving Jamaica at all at such a time. His sense of duty, indeed, should have kept him fast in Port Royal, but his sense of duty was smothered in hatred, that most fruitless and corruptive of all the emotions. And the great cabin of Vice Admiral Craufurd's flagship, the Imperator, the deputy governor got drunk that night to celebrate his conviction that the sands of Captain Blood's career were running out.